G'day, ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today, we're going to go back to the ground, which doesn't really happen too often on the channel these days, although I do still enjoy tanks. But we're going to have a look at a low-tier tank that was recently introduced to the French tree in the premium section, and it is something that we have wanted for a very long time. Now, those of you who know me well will know that I absolutely adore the M24 Chaffee. It's probably one of the better low-tier tanks, one of the low-tier light tanks, in fact, and just combines a beautiful amount of mobility, stabilizer, gun, reload, versatility. It's just, for me, a really fine balance. And now we have an AMX-13 chassis with a turret of an M24. The first thing that I noticed is that this thing does not have a stabilizer. For some reason, the French thought that they would be clever and remove the bloody stabilizer. Of course the French would do that, because why the hell not? It genuinely baffles me. Like, out of all the things you were to remove from the M24 Chaffee, it's not the massive Commander's cupola, it's not the lack of armor, it's not the Browning M2 on top, it's the stabilizer. And I don't really know why. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it could potentially be that, stabilizers weren't designed for the Chaffee and they were sort of retrofitted, kind of like some Shermans, and they just didn't end up using them like they did on the Shermans. Well, they did on some, but they were just too complicated for, the crews, and they sort of just didn't use them at all, which is kind of weird. But anyway, diverging from that, I'm on Frozen Arse, which is probably one of the shittest maps in the game for high tier, but it's honestly not that bad for low tier. Now, my first shot goes into this PVKV2, and it sort of blurs out of nowhere, but that's okay because I've got machine guns on top, and I'm going to use them to finish off the PVKV. I'm trying to basically stop anyone from coming through this little pass out towards the enemy, or to our spawn, and perhaps to cut off any flanks or rotations of enemy tanks. But I just don't see anything until my teammate decides, "Let I push through." And so I'm starting to see a massive push through the A point, which is kind of spooky to me because that, of course, being our objective, is really important. So Panzer IV-G in that little pass there gets absolutely nuked by that 75mm round, and I think I can see something through the trees there, scouting it, and I'm going to try and put a finger on it. Now, this tank has some weird gun depression. It's not quite as good as I would have hoped, and of course, because it's not stabilized, it is not that easy to just sort of whirl around the corner and oof your opponents into oblivion. Chucking down a bit of artillery because I can see something. It's moved forward towards the big boulder there, and I'm trying to catch it as it comes out or finish it off with artillery. Now, I'm really just looking for an angle on this guy. And it seems like my team is starting to struggle with taking that cap. Now, as a light tank, don't get me wrong, I would love to push that A cap, but with the armor and the mobility and the lack of stabilizer that I have, I believe it is pretty damn unpractical, or impractical rather, to push like that. And so I'm going to try and clean up the flanks. Now, I don't really have any opportunity to shoot at this thing that was behind the rocks, but maybe, just maybe, I can get to that Panzer III, and unfortunately, he turns his turret in time and spots me because I didn't have my turret ready. That's something that you should really consider in tanks, is preparing your turret positioning before you push a hill, a ridge, a corner, anything like that. Make sure you have your gun basically ready to stop and fire. So, I do what every normal person would do and wait for them to move, and that's exactly what I've done. They've moved, and I managed to get their commander, turret ring, and a couple of other sort of knickknacks, if you will, in the crew. So, one more shot into the side, and that finishes them off for my third kill. My team is starting to push around this pass, and this is my opportunity to sort of take a nice position in a cheeky spot, and try and go for either, this little guy here, who I damage but don't kill for some reason, or alternatively some other positions that are coming back from spawn. You can see that little, I think it's a Panzer IV or a Panzer III, and I managed to put a shell into it, and it turns out it's a Chaffee, and that I'm just suffering from blind, I suppose. Anyway, The A-cap is really, really starting to struggle, and my team has just been completely repelled from the tunnel. Essentially, what you need is either complete map control or an early hold in that tunnel to really do anything effectively. So, what do? I turn my turret around, seeing a little dot coming from spawn, and it's a Panzer IV. Those things are extremely deadly. Now, I don't even have time to sort of sit on that because I see some gun smoke coming from what I believe might be a Panzer IV, but it turns out it's a tank destroyer. I think it's one of those Italian things. And so I'm going to be very careful when I push around the corner to only push when I've sort of shot at him and I shoot the lower front plate, damaging the transmission. These things have ridiculously thick armor, and at this point I just struggle to penetrate them. I really need to sort of get my shit together before he reloads, and I put one shot through, or try to put one shot through that front plate, but it's really just not going anywhere. So I do the next best thing and chuck it through that sort of gap in the mantlet, and sure enough, I get a really nice shot. Now, over the hill, if you saw that really quickly, there are two more Italian tank destroyer thingies, but before I even have time to deal with that, I have another Panzer III rolling over the hill looking straight at me that I have to deal with. I'm starting to get surrounded by enemies. This is getting ridiculously crazy. There's another Stug that's looking straight at me, and thankfully the 75mm gun can deal with that quite well. I'm now at 8 kills, and obviously because my teammates are falling apart, there's not a whole lot that I can really do. So this Puma decides he wants to drive straight past me, put one into him and get fucking bugger all, so I finish him off with the machine guns and wait for the reload to deal with whatever's coming next. This honestly feels like a German tank in the Battle of Kursk, looking for Soviet tanks, and the simple way to defeat your opponent is to just bring 93 tanks when your enemy can only carry 92 shells, it seems. So, I'm going to continue taking out another Semovente. It is starting to get really hectic, and now I've realized that I do not have enough shells to take out more than maybe 3 or 4 more enemies. I put one into that little STRV, and I'm dealing now with a Sturmhaubitzer, or Sturch, or whatever you want to call it. He derps the shot into the rock, and I derp the shot into him, and it's practically game over now. I have to try and escape from this Stug, and thankfully the Chaffee turret comes equipped with smoke. So I'm going to pop out some smoke, try and recover, repair, and maybe get back into the fight. But I do not have enough ammunition to continue going, and it seems like this battle is going to be lost after all this effort. Now, the M24, or AMX-13 M24, is actually really good at these sort of flanking shots where there's plenty of enemies and plenty of scouting to be done. But if you do not have a team to sort of back you up, then you're going to really be struggling. And that's exactly what's happening here. I just don't have the team to back me up, and there are just too many enemies, which is okay, it happens. It's just a low tier thing, and I don't know where that shell goes. So, apart from getting gaijined a couple of times and having some pretty crappy things happen, it's almost time to die. So, what am I going to do? Try and at least take a couple more with me. There's another P40 Leoncello going down into the grave with me. And as you take a quick look at that team score, you notice that we are in a really bad position. Another shot again from another enemy tank. It looks like a Stuart. And I've got a 17-second repair here. I do not think I have the opportunity to repair it all. And there I finally go down with 12 kills and 3 assists. That has to be one of the most wild games of War Thunder, of any tank game that I have played in a long time. The Chaffee turret is really good. It can dish out a lot of punishment in a very short amount of time. And as you can see there on the team list, it still wasn't nearly enough to even dent a hole in the opponent's sort of, in their numbers. But given the correct spot, given the correct lines of fire, and of course, given the correct teammates, you can actually make this tank work really well. I was extremely disappointed that it didn't have a stabilizer, but honestly, it shouldn't really be using that stabilizer. You shouldn't be out there pushing front lines with this tank. You should be taking sneaky routes. You should be sort of looking for opportunities where enemies aren't quite looking at you. taking those sneaky sort of back road positions, if you will, and trying to make the most out of those enemies that aren't looking towards you. So, this thing isn't worth your money. Honestly, it's down to what you want. If you want to grind, I would probably go instead for the FL10 if it's still available on the store. If not, I would probably Talisman and maybe the 105 Sherman, but it's more a collector's thing. It's not a tank that is going to be ridiculously overpowered or incredibly useful. It's definitely competitive. It's definitely at the right battle rating, but it's not one of those tanks that will shape the meta or will completely, throw enemies off their guard. At the end of the day, it is just an AMX-13 with a different turret. It's not anything particularly incredible, but if you really like that sort of thing, it's quite fun. And of course, it's a light tank. It can go into your light tank lineup. Granted, it is the same battle rating as the regular AMX-13 F11, so do as what you will with it. It's definitely not one of those tanks that you need. It's certainly something that you can buy, and that's what makes it a good premium. Part of me tells me, or part of me says I want it in the regular tree, but having it as a premium is honestly fine. I don't see anything wrong with it. I think it is a great addition to War Thunder, and it is certainly a relaxing low-tier tank to make a couple of Silver Lions, provided, of course, that your team isn't garbage and you win. But it's okay. I guess these games kind of happen, and there's nothing you can really do, so we might as well take the L, enjoy the 12 kills, and learn from our lessons, I suppose. Perhaps take a squad next time. But honestly, this game was pretty fun. I genuinely enjoyed myself, and I think you'll enjoy yourself too, if you are like me and enjoy this type of tank. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was the AMX-13 M24. Genuinely enjoyable piece of machinery that isn't really necessary, but is still great fun to play with, and great fun to finish off those sort of low-tier tanks that recently got added to the French tech tree. Anyway, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Do stay safe out there and take care, and I'll catch you next time.